The door. Nobody told you about stop. Before you scroll past this, before you convince yourself you've heard it all before, I need you to stay with me for just 30 seconds, because what I'm about to tell you is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. You've had goals, real ones, the kind that kept you up at night, buzzing with possibility. You've made promises to yourself about your health, your relationships, your finances, your career. You've had fresh starts on Monday mornings and bold declarations on January 1st. You've watched the motivational videos, underlined the books, felt that surge of yes, this is it, this time is different. And then it wasn't. Not because you're weak, not because you're unlucky, not because the universe has some personal vendetta against you, but because nobody ever handed you the right keys. Here's the truth that most self-help books dance around. Life is not chaos. It's a series of doors. Doors labeled opportunity, connection, freedom, peace, all waiting to be opened. But every single one of them requires the same 4 keys. And until you possess all 4, you'll keep standing in the hallway wondering why nothing opens for you. Those 4 keys: your mouth, your mind, your mood, your money. Master these 4, and I mean genuinely master them, not just intellectually understand them, and something extraordinary happens. Your relationships shift. Your confidence stops feeling like a performance. Your emotional world becomes something you navigate rather than something that drags you underwater. And your financial reality? It starts reflecting your actual potential instead of your deepest fears. But here's what nobody tells you about these 4 keys. They're not separate. They're connected at the root. Your uncontrolled mood bleeds into your spending. Your careless words create mental chaos that poisons your emotional stability. Your financial stress floods your mind with anxiety that hijacks every conversation you have. Pull on one thread and the whole sweater unravels. That's why half measures don't work. That's why the guy who reads every personal finance book but ignores his psychology stays broke. That's why the woman who masters her emotions but lets her words run wild keeps destroying the relationships she's worked so hard to build. You need all 4 keys, and you need to understand how they work together. This isn't theory. This isn't a motivational speech designed to make you feel good for 48 hours and then evaporate. What you're about to read is a practical, deeply researched, street-tested system built specifically for people who are done with almost reaching their potential, done with almost having the relationship they want, done with almost feeling financially free. In the chapters ahead, you're going to discover exactly why your current patterns exist, the psychology behind them, the neuroscience beneath them, and most importantly, the precise steps to permanently change them. You'll understand why self-control isn't a personality trait you either have or don't have. You'll learn why silence is often the most powerful thing you can say. You'll uncover the money stories you inherited from your parents that are quietly sabotaging your bank account right now, and by the end, you'll have a concrete 90-day transformation plan. Not a vague suggestion, but a week-by-week roadmap that will make the life you've been imagining start becoming the life you're actually living. The person who controls their mouth holds social power. The person who controls their mind holds reality in their hands. The person who controls their mood holds inner peace no external circumstance can steal. And the person who controls their money holds freedom. Real freedom, not the bumper sticker kind. When all 4 align, you don't just improve your life, you become its master. So let's begin. The architecture of self-control. Why willpower is a lie. And what actually works. Here's a question that might sting a little. Why do smart people make terrible decisions? Not occasionally, consistently. Brilliantly intelligent, deeply motivated, genuinely well-meaning people who know exactly what they should do and still don't do it. The doctor who smokes, the financial advisor drowning in credit card debt, the therapist in a toxic relationship, the productivity coach who can't get out of bed before noon. Knowledge isn't the problem. Intention isn't the problem. And here's the part that changes everything when you finally accept it: willpower isn't the solution. We've been sold a lie about self-control. The lie sounds like this: some people just have it and some people don't. The strong ones succeed, the weak ones fail. It's about character. That narrative is not only wrong, it's actively harmful. Because when you believe that self-control is a fixed character trait, every time you fail to maintain it, you don't just lose a battle. You lose yourself. You collect evidence for the story that you're fundamentally broken. And broken people don't try very hard. Here's what the science actually says, and pay attention because this reframes everything. Self-control is a resource, not a character trait. A resource. And like every resource, money, energy, time, it depletes with use. Researchers have called this phenomenon ego depletion, and the studies behind it are striking. People who spent the morning resisting temptation made worse decisions in the afternoon. Judges made harsher rulings after long stretches without food. Patients who had been holding difficult emotions were more likely to snap at nurses by evening. You're not failing at discipline because you're weak. You're failing because you've been using a gas-powered engine and forgetting to put gas in it. But here's where it gets genuinely exciting. You can expand the tank, and you can engineer your life so the tank never runs dry. Think of self-control like a professional athlete thinks about conditioning. A marathon runner doesn't just show up to race day hoping their legs carry them 26 miles. They build a systematic training architecture, incrementally increasing distance, strategically scheduling rest, optimizing nutrition, designing a race day strategy. The system carries them, not just the willpower in the moment. The same principle applies to your mouth, your mind, your mood, and your money. The goal is never to white-knuckle your way through every temptation. The goal is to build systems so smart that the right choice becomes the easy choice. Consider what that actually looks like in practice. Marcus, a 34-year-old teacher in Chicago, used to begin every day telling himself, "Today, I won't check social media during school hours." Every single day, by second period, he'd already failed. The phone would be out. Not because Marcus lacked discipline, because the phone was in his pocket, notifications vibrating against his thigh, a direct line to dopamine running through his nervous system. The environment made failure almost inevitable. The moment Marcus started leaving his phone in a locker across the building, his willpower problem disappeared overnight. He hadn't grown stronger. He'd made weakness structurally irrelevant. This is the architecture of self-control. Now let's zoom out, because the four keys, mouth, mind, mood, money, are not four separate challenges. They are four expressions of the same underlying system. And understanding why they're connected is what separates people who dabble in self-improvement from people who actually transform. When you practice pausing before you speak, you're not just improving your communication, you're building the neural circuitry of delayed response, the same circuitry that helps you pause before spiraling into anxious thinking, pause before reacting emotionally in a crisis, and pause before making an impulse purchase. You'll regret by morning. When you learn to redirect your thoughts away from catastrophic narratives, you're not just improving your mental health. You're building a cognitive flexibility that makes you harder to destabilize emotionally and more strategic in your financial decisions. When you develop emotional regulation, the ability to feel something without immediately becoming it. You become someone who doesn't say things in anger that shatter relationships, doesn't make purchases to numb discomfort, and doesn't let a bad Tuesday turn into a bad month. And when you gain genuine control over your financial behavior, the reduction in stress and anxiety creates mental and emotional clarity that makes everything else easier. They are one system, which means improving any one of the four immediately leverages all the others, and it means that neglecting any one weakens the whole structure. The architecture we're building across this book has three foundational pillars. Pillar 1, awareness. You cannot control what you haven't noticed. The first layer of every breakthrough is simply learning to see your own patterns with clarity and honesty. Without judgment, without drama, just accurate observation. Pillar 2, systems. Awareness without structure is just interesting self-knowledge. Once you can see your patterns, you design the systems, environments, habits, routines, triggers that make your preferred behaviors automatic. Pillar 3, identity. This is the one most people miss. Sustainable transformation requires that you stop thinking of self-control as something you do and start experiencing it as something you are. Not, I'm trying to be disciplined, but I'm a disciplined person. The shift sounds subtle. The impact is seismic. Over the next chapters, we're going to build all three pillars across all four keys. We're going to go deep into the psychology, the practical mechanics, and the lived experience of what it actually feels like to stop reacting to your life and start designing it. But before we dive into each key individually, there's one concept you need to carry with you through everything that follows. The gap. Between stimulus and response, there is a gap. A split second, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, where you are neither fully controlled by the trigger nor fully free of it. In that gap lives your entire capacity for transformation. Every technique in this book is, at its core, a method for finding that gap, widening it, and learning to make conscious choices within it. The person who can't find the gap says things they wish they hadn't, thinks thoughts they can't escape, feels emotions that run their life, spends money they don't have on things they don't need. The person who has found the gap, they speak with intention, they think with direction, they feel with awareness, they spend with strategy. You're going to find your gap, and then you're going to learn to live inside it. Let's go. Mastering. Your mouth, the weapon, you carry everywhere and rarely aim. Well, there's a story that circulates in certain leadership circles about a CEO who, after closing a career-defining deal, watched the whole thing dissolve in the parking lot. 15 minutes after the handshake, during what should have been a celebratory dinner, he made an offhand comment about his new partner's previous business failure. He thought he was being candid. He thought he was being real. The deal fell apart by morning. One sentence, one unguarded moment, months of work, gone. Your mouth is the most powerful tool you own. It can close deals and break them, build love and destroy it, create movements and end careers. It is capable of extraordinary construction and extraordinary devastation, sometimes within the same conversation. And most people treat it like a leaking faucet, constantly running, rarely considered, causing slow damage they barely notice until the ceiling caves in. Mastering your mouth is not about becoming a polished corporate speaker or learning to sound impressive at dinner parties. It's about developing a relationship with your words that is intentional, where every significant thing you say has been chosen, not just released. Let's start with the principle that separates people who consistently communicate well from those who consistently communicate destructively. Speaking is a choice, not a reflex. This sounds obvious. It isn't obvious in practice. Most of what people say, especially in emotionally charged situations, is reflex. Stimulus arrives, mouth opens, words exit. No gap, no consideration, just reaction dressed up as communication. The antidote is what I call the triple gate. Before any significant communication, any conversation where the stakes are real, run your words through 3 gates. Gate 1. Is it true? Not just technically accurate, but genuinely, fully true. Not a partial truth weaponized to make a point. Not an exaggeration to win. An argument. Fully, honestly true. Gate 2. Is it necessary? Does this need to be said? Not, do I want to say it? You might desperately want to say plenty of things that serve absolutely no purpose except temporary emotional release. Is it necessary? Will something genuinely better result from these words being spoken? Gate 3. Is this the right moment? Truth delivered at the wrong time, to the wrong person, in the wrong emotional climate, can cause as much damage as a lie. Timing is not a courtesy. It is a critical communication variable. Most of the things that cause the most damage, the words that cost people relationships, opportunities, and reputations, would never have been spoken if the speaker had paused for 3 seconds at each gate. Practice this in low-stakes situations first. When your friend asks what you think of their new haircut, run it through the gates. Not because honesty is bad, but because you're training the habit. When you're about to send an email that has an edge to it, run it through the gates. When you're tempted to offer unsolicited advice, run it through the gates. Do this enough times in small moments, and when the high-stakes moment arrives, when you're in an argument with your partner, when your boss criticizes your work unfairly, when someone publicly disrespects you, the habit will be there. The gate will engage automatically. Now let's talk about the dimension of mouth mastery that almost nobody addresses, what you say to yourself. There's a voice in your head that hasn't stopped talking since you were old enough to have thoughts. This voice has opinions about everything: your appearance, your intelligence, your worthiness, your future. And the majority of people have never once questioned whether that voice is telling the truth. Here's the uncomfortable reality. That voice was largely programmed by other people. A parent who expressed disappointment one too many times, a teacher who said you weren't math material, a sibling's careless comparison, an ex-partner who chipped away at your self-image, a culture that decided your body, your accent, your background made you less than. These voices became your voice, not because they were accurate, but because they were repeated often enough to become automatic. And here's why this matters in the context of self-mastery. You cannot consistently behave better than your self-talk. If the dominant narrative in your internal dialogue is, "I'm not disciplined enough, I always self-sabotage, I don't deserve real success," your behavior will organize itself around proving those stories true. Not because you're weak, because you're consistent. This is why self-talk transformation isn't soft psychology, it's structural change. You are literally rewiring the operating system that runs every decision you make. The process begins with noticing. Before you can change the voice, you have to hear it, actually hear it, not just be carried along by it. Start today. Every time you catch yourself making a strongly negative statement about yourself, pause. Write it down if you can. "I'm so stupid. I can't stick to anything. I'll never figure this out." Then do something most people find surprisingly difficult. Treat yourself like you'd treat someone you love. If your closest friend said, "I'm so stupid," after making a mistake, would you nod and say, "Yeah, pretty much"? Or would you offer perspective, context, compassion? You'd remind them that one mistake doesn't define their intelligence. You'd point to their wins. You'd offer encouragement without minimizing the difficulty. Speak to yourself the same way, not with toxic positivity. Don't pretend failures didn't happen. But with the balanced, supportive honesty you'd offer someone whose success genuinely matters to you. The second layer of mouth mastery involves learning to ask better questions. Questions are the steering wheel of conversation. They direct attention, invite collaboration, and reveal possibilities that declarations keep hidden. Notice the difference between these two responses to a team setback. This approach clearly isn't working. Closes, creates defensiveness, implies fault. What would need to change for this to work? Opens. Creates collaboration, implies possibility. Same situation, completely different energy, completely different outcome. Make it a practice. In meetings, in relationships, in your own internal processing. Wherever you're tempted to make a closing statement, see if you can open it into a question instead. This single habit has the power to transform your leadership, your relationships, and your relationship with your own potential. Let's address something harder now. The conversations you've been avoiding. Most people have at least one conversation, probably several, they know they need to have but haven't. With a partner, a parent, a friend, a colleague. Something that needs to be addressed but keeps getting postponed because the discomfort of having the conversation feels worse than the discomfort of not having it. It rarely is. Unspoken, necessary conversations don't disappear. They go underground. They express themselves as resentment, distance, passive aggression, or sudden explosive arguments over something entirely unrelated. The longer they wait, the larger they grow. Mouth mastery includes the courage to say the difficult things that need to be said, with compassion, with timing, with care, but said, not swallowed, not indefinitely postponed. Here's a framework for difficult conversations that reduces both the fear of having them and the likelihood of them going sideways. Start with intent. Before any difficult conversation, spend 60 seconds getting completely clear on your actual goal. Not win the argument. That's not a goal. It's a trap. What outcome do you genuinely want? Clarity, reconnection, change in behavior, resolution? Knowing your intent keeps you anchored when the conversation gets turbulent. Lead with the relationship. The moment the other person feels attacked, they stop listening and start defending. Opening with something like, "This conversation matters to me because you matter to me," creates a different emotional container than launching directly into the grievance. Describe behavior, not character. When the project deadline was missed without warning, I was put in a difficult position with the client is behaviorally specific and factual. You're unreliable and inconsiderate is a character attack that shuts everything down. People can change behavior. Attacked characters dig in. Stay curious. Even when you're convinced you understand the full picture, stay genuinely curious about the other person's experience. Ask. Listen. The conversation you think you're having is almost never the only conversation happening. Finally, there's a dimension of mouth mastery that requires no words at all. Strategic silence is a form of communication, often the most powerful form. The pause before you answer a question, the decision not to respond to a provocation, the choice to listen completely before speaking, the discipline to keep your plans private until they become results. In a culture addicted to noise, where everyone has an opinion and the social media machine rewards the loudest voices with the most attention, the person who knows when to be quiet becomes remarkable. Not because silence is passive, but because it signals a level of self-possession that immediately commands respect. Practice this week. Find 3 situations where you would normally speak and choose silence instead. Observe what happens. Notice how people respond. Notice what information emerges that would have been crowded out if you'd rushed to fill the space. Your mouth is one of 4 keys, but in many ways it's the most publicly visible one. How you speak, And when you don't, tells the world exactly what you think of yourself and what you believe about your capacity to lead, to love, and to create. Speak like it matters, because it does. Conquering your mind. The battlefield nobody talks about, and everyone is losing. On a Tuesday morning in Seattle, a woman named Diana sits down with her coffee and opens her laptop to write. She's been working on a business proposal for 3 months, something she believes in deeply, something that could genuinely change her financial situation and give her the creative freedom she's been chasing for years. She opens the document, reads the first paragraph, and immediately, without warning, a voice appears. Who do you think you are? You don't have an MBA. You've failed before. This is going to be embarrassing. People are going to see right through this. She closes the laptop, makes another coffee she doesn't need, reorganizes her desk, checks Instagram, does 3 loads of laundry. By evening, the day is gone. Diana doesn't have a laziness problem. She doesn't have a discipline problem. She doesn't even have a confidence problem in the conventional sense. Put her in a room talking about her idea, and she's brilliant, clear, compelling. Diana has a mind control problem, and it is costing her everything. The battlefield of self-mastery is your mind, not your calendar, not your bank account, not your relationships, your mind. Everything else is downstream of what happens in the 6 inches between your ears, and the overwhelming majority of people are losing battles in that space every single day without even realizing the war is happening. Let's start with a truth that is both liberating and unsettling. You are not your thoughts. Read that again, because the implications are enormous. The thought that says you're not good enough, that's not you. It's a pattern, a deeply grooved neural pathway formed through repetition that fires automatically when certain triggers arise. The thought that rehearses the worst-case scenario every time something uncertain looms, that's not your wisdom speaking. That's your threat detection system calibrated decades ago when you were a child who needed to anticipate danger to survive. You are the awareness behind the thoughts, the observer. And observers can choose what to do with what they observe. This is the foundational insight of mind mastery, creating space between the thought and your relationship to it. Not eliminating thoughts. The mind generates thoughts the way the lungs generate breath, automatically, constantly, without being asked. The goal is not a silent mind. The goal is a directed one. The technical name for this capacity is metacognition, thinking about thinking. It's the ability to zoom out from your mental content and observe it from a slight distance. There's that catastrophizing pattern again. There's the inner critic showing up. There's my brain running the "you're not worthy of this" loop. Naming the pattern doesn't eliminate it, but it fundamentally changes your relationship to it. What once felt like capital T truth becomes recognizable as a familiar, biased narrator. And once you can see the narrator, you can start questioning the narration. Here's the practical starting point for developing metacognition in daily life. The 2-second inventory. At 3 random points throughout your day, stop and ask, what have I been thinking for the last 5 minutes? You don't need to judge what you find, just observe. Are you rehearsing a future conflict? Replaying a past humiliation? Spiraling through a financial anxiety loop? Planning? Creating? The simple act of noticing shifts your relationship to the content. Do this for 2 weeks, and you'll discover something that surprises most people. You have far more mental real estate available than you thought. You've just been unconsciously renting most of it to negative patterns you never chose. Now, let's talk about the most practical mind control tool in this entire book: cognitive reframing. Reframing is not positive thinking. It is not pretending that problems don't exist or that difficult situations are secretly wonderful. It is the deliberate practice of choosing the most accurate and useful interpretation of a situation rather than defaulting to the most negative one. Here's how it works in practice. You apply for a promotion. You don't get it. Your automatic interpretation: I'm not capable enough. My work doesn't stand out. I'm not going anywhere in this company. A reframe doesn't deny the disappointment. It asks, what else could be true? The person promoted had 3 more years of experience. I've only been in this role for 18 months. This gives me specific feedback about what I need to develop. The manager took 20 minutes to explain exactly what I'd need to demonstrate to be considered next cycle. That's actually a roadmap. Same event. Completely different mental and emotional trajectory. The key question for any reframe is this: what interpretation of this situation would be both honest and useful? Not falsely positive, not denial. Honest and useful. Those two constraints together keep you from both catastrophizing and delusion. The next layer of mind mastery is directing your mental focus with intention. Your brain is, among many things, a remarkable search engine. Ask it a question, and it will work, often unconsciously, across hours and days, to find answers. The problem is that most people are asking terrible questions. Why does this always happen to me? Why can't I get it together? Why is everything so difficult? Your brain will answer those questions, and it will not be kind, but ask it different questions. What's one thing I could do differently in this situation? Where is there an opportunity I haven't noticed? What would someone I admire do here? And it goes to work on entirely different material. Your mind follows your questions. Make them good ones. This is why morning direction is one of the highest leverage practices available to you. The first 15 minutes after waking are neurologically significant. Your brain is in a semi-suggestible state, transitioning out of sleep, unusually receptive to the direction you provide. Most people hand these precious minutes to their phone, immediately bathing their most receptive mental state in notification anxiety, comparison culture, and news cycle stress. What if instead you spent those minutes directing your mind toward your actual priorities? A simple morning mental practice might look like this: 3 minutes, reviewing your most meaningful goals, not your to-do list, your real goals, the ones that make your life feel meaningful. 2 minutes identifying the single most important thing you could do today in service of those goals. 2 minutes rehearsing, actually seeing yourself navigating the day with clarity, confidence, and focus. That's 7 minutes. 7 minutes that set a completely different neurological tone than 7 minutes of anxious scrolling. Let's talk about negative thought patterns specifically, because most people have 2 or 3 dominant patterns that derail them repeatedly. Knowing your patterns is half the battle. Catastrophizing, automatically jumping to worst-case scenarios. The headache is a brain tumor. The delayed email means they hate me. The business slowdown is bankruptcy. Mind reading, assuming you know what others are thinking, usually negatively. They didn't respond immediately, they must be angry. She didn't laugh at my joke, she thinks I'm an idiot. All or nothing thinking. If it's not perfect, it's worthless. I broke my diet once. The whole week is ruined. I made one mistake in the presentation. The whole thing was a disaster. Personalization, assuming everything negative is about you. The meeting got canceled, they must be avoiding me. The project struggled, it must be my fault. Identify which patterns you fall into most often. Then create a specific counter-response for each. Not a dismissal. A genuine alternative interpretation that passes the honest and useful test. One final principle of mind mastery that doesn't get enough attention: the company your mind keeps when you're not directing it. Your mental landscape is shaped by what you consistently feed it. The books you read, the podcasts you listen to, the conversations you have, the social media you consume. These aren't passive entertainment experiences, they are inputs that literally shape your neural architecture over time. If you spend 3 hours a day consuming content that makes you feel anxious, inadequate, outraged, or inferior, you are not relaxing. You are training. You're training your brain to be more anxious, more comparative, more reactive. Choose your mental inputs the way a professional athlete chooses their nutrition. Not perfectly, not obsessively, but with genuine intentionality about what you're actually building inside yourself. Your mind, trained and directed, is the most powerful force in your life. Untrained and ignored, it's the most destructive. The difference is simply this: who's in charge? Managing your mood, the invisible variable that controls everything. There's a version of you that exists on great days. You know this version. Sharp, warm, creative, generous. The kind of person who handles problems with grace, sees opportunities where others see obstacles, makes people feel genuinely better for having spent time with you. In this state, you make good decisions. You communicate well. You're patient with people you love. You feel, in the truest sense, like yourself. And there's another version that shows up sometimes: reactive, foggy, irritable, small. Everything feels harder than it should. People get on your nerves for reasons you can't fully articulate. You say things you wouldn't normally say. You make choices you wouldn't normally make. You look at the same life circumstances you faced yesterday and see them completely differently. Darker, more threatening, more hopeless. Same person, same life, completely different experience. That variable is your mood, and it is running your life far more than your intelligence, your skills, or your strategies ever will. Here's the radical claim of this chapter, and I want you to sit with it rather than immediately agreeing or disagreeing. Your mood is not something that happens to you. It is something you participate in creating, moment by moment, through the choices you make about your body, your focus, your language, and your environment. Not with perfect control. Human beings are not machines, but with significantly more influence than most people ever exercise. This is not a denial of real hardship. Some circumstances are genuinely, objectively terrible, and anyone who tells you to just choose happiness in the face of real loss or real trauma is selling something dangerous. Genuine difficulty demands genuine acknowledgement. But for most of what shapes our day-to-day emotional experience, the traffic jam, the delayed project, the difficult colleague, the financial worry, the relationship friction, the event is 5%. Our interpretation and response is 95%. Let's build the architecture of mood mastery. Layer 1. The body-emotion connection. Western culture has spent centuries treating the mind and body as separate entities. Neuroscience has spent the last 30 years demonstrating how profoundly mistaken that framework is. Your emotional state is not located in your mind in isolation. It is a whole-body experience. Your posture communicates to your brain about your emotional state. Your breathing rate influences your cortisol levels. Your facial expressions, even forced ones, trigger neurochemical responses. Your movement patterns signal to your nervous system whether you're safe or under threat. This means you have a physical back door into your emotional state. Try this right now. Wherever you are, allow your shoulders to round forward. Let your gaze drop slightly toward the floor. Take 3 shallow breaths. Hold this for 30 seconds and notice how you feel. Now, deliberately do the opposite. Roll your shoulders back and down. Lift your gaze. Take 3 slow, deep breaths that fill your lower abdomen. Hold a slight smile, even artificially, and stay with this for 30 seconds. The difference in your emotional state between those two physical postures will be measurable and real. Your brain receives the physical signals and begins organizing your emotional experience around them. This is not a trick or a superficial hack. It is physiology, and it gives you immediate access to mood management without needing any external circumstances to change first. The most powerful physiological mood tool available to you is breath, specifically extending your exhale. When your exhale is longer than your inhale, try 4 counts in, 6 counts out, you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest counterbalance to the stress response. Heart rate slows, cortisol drops, cognitive clarity returns. 3 slow breaths with extended exhales. That's available to you in the middle of a difficult meeting, a heated conversation, a financial anxiety spiral, a moment of rage in traffic. That's always available. Layer 2. The focus emotion. Loop. What you consistently focus on shapes your emotional landscape, not metaphorically, literally, neurologically, physically. The brain has a feature called the reticular activating system, essentially a filter that decides what information deserves your conscious attention out of the enormous volume of sensory data available at any moment. And the filter takes its cues from your dominant thoughts and expectations. Tell the filter the world is full of threat and disappointment, consciously or not, and it will find threat and disappointment everywhere. Tell it there are opportunities and reasons for gratitude in my current situation, and it will find those instead. Neither filter is lying. Both are finding real things. What determines which filter is active is the story you're rehearsing in your internal dialogue. This is why practices like deliberate gratitude aren't just pleasant emotional hygiene. They're literally reprogramming your perceptual filter. When you spend 3 minutes each morning identifying specific concrete things in your life that are genuinely good, not performed gratitude, but real searching for what's actually working, you are training your RAS to scan for those things throughout the day. The effect compounds. People who practice this consistently report not just feeling more grateful, but actually noticing more opportunities, encountering more positive interactions, experiencing less daily friction. Not because their circumstances changed dramatically, because their filter did. Layer 3. Language and emotional amplification. The words you use to describe your experience don't just reflect your emotional state, they amplify it. There's a significant neurological difference between "I'm devastated" and "I'm disappointed," between "this is a disaster" and "this is a setback," between "I can't handle this" and "this is genuinely difficult right now." The first word in each pair activates a more intense threat response in your nervous system. Your body hears devastated and begins organizing itself for catastrophe. It hears disappointed and calibrates for a manageable emotional experience. Linguistic precision about emotional experience is not emotional minimization. You're not pretending the difficult thing is fine. You're choosing the most accurate description. And in doing so, preventing your language from escalating your emotional experience beyond what the situation actually warrants. Start paying attention to your emotional vocabulary when you describe how you feel, even to yourself, even in your internal dialogue. Are you reaching for the most dramatic word or the most accurate one? There's a meaningful difference, and it shapes how the next hour of your life unfolds. Layer 4. Understanding your emotional triggers. A trigger is any stimulus, a tone of voice, a specific phrase, a type of situation, that predictably activates a disproportionately intense emotional response in you. The emphasis on disproportionate is important. When your response is significantly larger than the objective situation warrants, you're likely being triggered by something older and deeper than the present moment. Triggers are essentially emotional memories, past experiences, often from childhood, that were charged with enough intensity to create a lasting neurological pattern. When something in the present activates that pattern, you don't just respond to what's happening now, you respond to everything that pattern carries from then. Understanding your triggers doesn't make them disappear immediately, but it does give you the priceless gift of context. When you notice yourself having a 10 out of 10 emotional reaction to what is objectively a 3 out of 10 situation, that awareness creates a gap. In that gap, this response is bigger than right now. I know what this is. I can choose something different. Layer 5. Emotional regulation in real time. Knowing all of this is important. Having tools to use in the moment is what actually changes your life. When you feel your emotional state beginning to shift in an unwanted direction, run this 3-step protocol. Name it. I notice I'm feeling anxious/angry/overwhelmed right now. This alone activates the prefrontal cortex and slightly reduces the intensity of the limbic response. Breathe it. 3 slow, extended exhales. Full stop. No shortcuts. Frame it. Ask, is this as serious as it feels right now? What's the most accurate and useful interpretation of what's actually happening? This sequence takes between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. In those 2 minutes, the peak intensity of most emotional storms begins to subside, not disappear. Process takes time, but subside enough for your rational mind to come back online and make a conscious choice. The person who can consistently deploy this sequence in real time, in difficult conversations, in high-pressure situations, in moments of relationship, friction is genuinely harder to destabilize than any outside force can match. That is not weakness in disguise. That is a superpower. And here's the truth about mood mastery that ties everything together. It's not about being happy all the time. The full range of human emotion, grief, anger, fear, sadness, frustration, exists for good reasons. These emotions carry information. They signal needs. They process experience. Trying to eliminate them is both impossible and undesirable. The goal is emotional fluency, the ability to feel the full range of human experience without being controlled by any of it, to experience disappointment without collapsing into despair, to feel anger without becoming destructive, to feel fear without letting it make your decisions. You're not building emotional armor. You're building emotional agility. And that agility, more than your intelligence, more than your skills, more than your network, will determine the quality of the life you create. Controlling your money. Why your bank account is a mirror and what it's showing you. Open your bank statement from last month, not to analyze it right now, just to have it mentally present as you read what comes next, because your bank statement is one of the most honest documents in your life. It doesn't record what you intend to spend money on. It doesn't capture who you want to be financially. It shows, with total indifference and perfect accuracy, exactly where your values, habits, fears, and beliefs express themselves in the real world. Most people are afraid to look, not because they're irresponsible, though some habits may need addressing, but because they sense, dimly, that what they'll find says something they're not ready to face. Here's the thing. It does say something important, and looking at it clearly, with honest eyes and without self-punishment, is the beginning of financial mastery. Money is not the subject of this chapter. You are. Every financial behavior, the impulse purchase at midnight, the savings account that stays empty despite good intentions, the credit card balance that never quite gets paid off, the reluctance to invest even when you know you should. Every one of these has a psychological root, and until you address the root, The financial techniques are like pruning a weed while the root system keeps expanding underground. This is why people can read every personal finance book on the market, understand every strategy intellectually, and still not change their financial behavior. The problem was never information. The problem is the story running beneath the information. Let's find your story. The financial blueprint. Every person carries a financial blueprint, a largely unconscious set of beliefs, expectations, and emotional associations about money that was constructed in childhood and continues to run your financial behavior decades later. Where does this blueprint come from? Everything you witnessed, heard, and absorbed about money during your formative years. The anxiety in your parents' voices when bills arrived, the silence around certain financial topics, the signal that money was shameful, dangerous, not to be discussed. The offhand comment from a relative, "We're not those kind of people." The wealth that seemed to corrupt someone you knew. The message absorbed through 1,000 small moments that wanting more was greedy, or that financial struggle was simply the family condition you'd inherit. These messages didn't announce themselves. They arrived quietly, through atmosphere and repetition, and settled into your subconscious as facts about how the world works. Take a moment to honestly consider. What did the environment of your childhood teach you about money? Not what you were told explicitly, what the atmosphere communicated. Was money a source of anxiety? Then your relationship with money may be shadowed by scarcity, fear, a deep background, anxiety about financial security that makes it difficult to invest, to spend on yourself without guilt, or to ever feel financially enough. Was money a source of conflict? Then financial conversations, even internal ones, may trigger an emotional response that makes you want to avoid them entirely. Was money associated with corruption, greed, or class tension? Then unconsciously, you may be sabotaging your own wealth accumulation to protect your sense of identity as a good person. None of these blueprints are your fault. All of them are your responsibility to examine. The three money personality types beyond the blueprint. Most people have a dominant financial personality, a default behavioral pattern that shows up consistently in how they relate to money. The avoider treats financial matters the way some people treat dental appointments. In theory, they know it's important. In practice, they find endless reasons to postpone. Bills go unopened. Accounts go unreconciled. Financial decisions get delayed until the delay itself becomes a problem. The emotional driver is usually overwhelm. Money feels so complicated, so charged, so loaded with past failure that not engaging seems easier than engaging badly. The spender uses money primarily as an emotional tool. Purchases create pleasure, status, comfort, or distraction. There's often genuine generosity here. Spenders can be remarkably giving. But the habit of spending money to manage emotional states creates a cycle where financial stress triggers spending that deepens the financial stress. The hoarder accumulates money through discipline but struggles to deploy it effectively. Investments feel too risky. Spending on experiences or enjoyment triggers guilt. The financial security they work so hard to build never actually produces the feeling of security they're seeking, because the anxiety was never about the number in the account. It was about a deep sense of vulnerability that no number can permanently fix. Most people are a blend of these types with one dominant pattern. Identifying yours isn't about self-criticism. It's about understanding your default settings so you can operate more consciously. The practical foundation, financial awareness. With psychology as the foundation, let's build the practical structure. Step 1 is embarrassingly simple and almost universally skipped. Know where your money goes, not in general, precisely, every dollar, for at least 1 month. This isn't budgeting yet, it's reconnaissance. You're mapping the terrain before you plan the route. Most people, when they do this for the first time, discover 2 or 3 spending categories where significant money is leaking in ways they hadn't consciously noticed. Subscriptions that auto-renew for services barely used, convenience spending, delivery fees, last-minute purchases, that adds up to several $100s a month. Emotional spending patterns that emerge on specific days of the week or in specific emotional states. You cannot interrupt a pattern you haven't seen. The value-based budget, once you have awareness, you build structure. But the word budget carries so much psychological weight, restriction, deprivation, punishment, that most people either avoid it entirely or build one they immediately abandon. Here's a reframe that changes everything. A budget is not a cage, it's a map. A map doesn't restrict where you can go. It shows you how to get there. A value-aligned budget does the same. It shows you how to direct your resources toward the life you actually want, rather than watching them disappear in the direction of your least examined habits. The foundation is the 50-30-20 structure. 50% of take-home income to needs, housing, transportation, utilities, minimum debt payments. 30% to wants, experiences, dining, entertainment, things that bring genuine enjoyment. 20% to future, savings, investments, accelerated debt repayment. This isn't a rigid prescription. It's a starting framework. Someone with significant debt may redirect the wants percentage toward debt elimination. Someone with a pension may adjust the savings percentage. The point is the habit of allocation, of deciding deliberately where money goes rather than spending first and calculating the damage later. Pay yourself thus. The most consistently wealth-building habit across virtually every personal finance framework is deceptively simple. Before you pay anyone else, pay your future self. This means saving and investing first, automatically, before any discretionary spending, rather than saving whatever happens to be left over at the end of the month. Whatever's left is usually nothing. Human beings reliably expand their spending to fill available resources, automate a transfer to savings or investment on the day your paycheck arrives. Even if the initial amount is modest, $50, $100, the habit of consistent saving, deployed early, creates remarkable long-term results through compounding. A concrete illustration. 2 people save an identical amount monthly over their working lives. Person A starts at 25, person B starts at 35. By retirement, person A has accumulated approximately twice what person B has, not because they saved twice as much per month, but because the money had a decade longer to compound. The gap between those 2 outcomes is not discipline, it's time. Time is the one financial resource that doesn't respond to extra effort. You cannot earn more of it. Once gone, it's gone. This is why starting, even imperfectly, even with small amounts, is more important than starting optimally. The psychology of debt. Not all debt is created equal, and treating it as a uniform evil creates poor strategy. Debt used to acquire appreciating assets, a reasonably priced home in a growing market, education that genuinely increases earning capacity, a business with solid fundamentals, can be a legitimate wealth-building tool. Debt used to finance consumption, particularly high-interest consumer credit card debt, is a silent financial emergency. The interest you're paying on consumer debt almost certainly exceeds any investment return you could reasonably expect. Before anything else, this debt deserves aggressive attention. If you carry consumer debt, here's a simple 2-step approach that psychological research supports. List your debts in order of interest rate, highest to lowest. Direct every additional dollar to the highest rate debt while maintaining minimums on all others. As each debt is eliminated, roll that payment amount toward the next highest rate debt. This approach minimizes the total interest paid, and if you need psychological momentum to stay motivated, you can alternatively list debts from smallest to largest balance and attack them in that order. Income is not a ceiling one, thing the personal finance conversation often neglects. There is no limit to how much you can earn. There is a hard floor on how much you can cut. Budgeting and expense management are important, but a person earning $30,000 a year can optimize their spending to the absolute maximum and still not build meaningful wealth. The real leverage is on the income side. What skills could you develop that would make you meaningfully more valuable in your marketplace? What problem exists in your world that enough people would pay to have solved? What existing asset, your knowledge, your network, your time, could be deployed differently? These are not rhetorical questions. They're practical ones with practical answers that most people simply don't spend time pursuing because they're so focused on managing the existing pie that they forget you can bake a bigger one. Money as a tool for freedom. Here is the final reframe, and perhaps the most important one. Money is not the destination. It is a tool for creating the destination. The person who accumulates wealth as an end in itself, as a way of keeping score, as evidence of their worth, as the measure of their success, will never feel financially arrived. The number will always need to be higher. The security will always feel incomplete. The person who understands money as a tool for creating genuine freedom, freedom to choose meaningful work over well-paying drudgery, freedom to be generous with people and causes they care about, freedom to weather unexpected storms without panic. That person has a relationship with money that actually produces peace. What does freedom look like for you specifically? Not the abstract concept, the lived experience. What would you do differently with your time? What choices would you make that you don't currently make? What would your days feel like? Let that vision be your why for the financial practices. Not discipline for discipline's sake, not frugality as a moral statement. Freedom as the destination, and money as the intentional tool for getting there. The hidden enemy, self-sabotage. Why you destroy what you build and how to stop. Let's talk about the pattern nobody likes to admit. You're making progress, real progress, the kind you can feel. You've been consistent. The momentum is building. Something that felt impossible 2 months ago is starting to feel genuinely within reach. And then, as if on cue, something happens. You pick a fight with the person who supports you most. You make a decision you knew was wrong the moment you made it. You quit the habit that was working. You create a crisis where there wasn't one, or you walk directly into one you could easily have avoided. This is not bad luck. This is not coincidence. This is self-sabotage. And it is far more sophisticated, far more pervasive, and far more psychologically intentional than most people realize. Self-sabotage is the immune system of your identity. Here's what that means. Your brain is, above all else, a prediction machine. It builds a model of reality, including a model of you, and it works constantly to confirm that model. Your existing self-concept, your beliefs about who you are, what you're capable of, and what you deserve, functions like a psychological thermostat. Drift too far above it, and the system activates to bring you back down. This is why it's not enough to want success. If your self-concept doesn't expect success, if somewhere in your psychological architecture lives a deep belief that success isn't really for people like you, or that achieving what you want means losing something you fear losing, your brain will find a way to restore familiar territory. usually by having you do something impressively stupid at exactly the wrong moment. The four faces of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage wears many disguises. Learning to recognize them in your own behavior is the beginning of its end. Perfectionism as paralysis. The perfectionist doesn't produce imperfect work, which means, functionally, they often don't produce work. The standard is set so high that any attempt will fall short, which makes not attempting the psychologically safer choice. I'll start when I'm ready. They are never ready. Readiness was never the point. The point was protecting the ego from the evidence that would come from actually trying and falling short. Imposter syndrome as saboteur. Success arrives, genuinely earned success, and instead of receiving it, you manage it anxiously. You minimize your own contribution. You wait for the moment when everyone realizes you've been faking it. You sometimes unconsciously create that moment because the anxiety of waiting for exposure is worse than the relief of it happening. The tragedy is that the exposure never actually comes because there's nothing to expose. But the sabotage happens anyway. The comfort of struggle. Some people have lived in difficulty long enough that difficulty has become their identity. I'm someone who struggles. And paradoxically, success, which looks like the antidote, can feel like a profound threat to that identity. Success means leaving behind a familiar self. Success means new expectations, new responsibilities, new possibilities for disappointment at a higher level. Staying in struggle, at least, is a known quantity. Proximity panic. The closest thing to a law in the psychology of self-sabotage. The closer you get to a significant breakthrough, the more intensely the sabotage tends to activate. The thesis is almost done, and you suddenly can't work on it. The relationship is the healthiest it's ever been, and you start an unnecessary conflict. The business is about to hit a significant milestone, and you make a decision that sets it back. This isn't random timing, it's the system activating precisely when the threat to existing identity is greatest. Recognizing your patterns, the work begins with an honest audit. Ask yourself, where in my life do I consistently stop just short of my goals? Not occasionally, but as a pattern. Where do you find yourself repeatedly within reach of something important and then, somehow, not getting it? Ask. What happens when things are going well? For many people, consistent success triggers an unconscious anxiety that eventually expresses itself as a destabilizing behavior. Notice whether positive momentum tends to be followed by a predictable disruption. Ask, what are the excuses I make most often? Excuses aren't just rationalizations, they're useful diagnostic information. The excuse you reach for most reliably when you're not following through reveals something about the fear or belief driving the avoidance. This inquiry is not about self-criticism. It is about honest pattern recognition. You cannot change a pattern you haven't clearly seen. Building a success identity. The most durable solution to self-sabotage is not motivational force, try harder, want it more, but identity renovation. Your behavior will always, over time, align with your self-concept, not with your goals, not with your intentions, with your identity. This means the work of transforming self-sabotage is ultimately the work of updating who you believe yourself to be. This is more concrete than it sounds. Identity is constructed through evidence. Your current self-concept, accurate or not, was built through accumulated experiences that your brain treated as data points about who you are. To renovate that identity, you need new data points. Small ones at first, promises made to yourself and kept, commitments honored even when the mood wasn't there, moments where you chose the response you intended rather than the reaction that came automatically. Each of these is a data point being filed by your brain under, "This is what I do. This is who I am." Over time, these data points accumulate into a new narrative. Not, I'm trying to be disciplined, I am a disciplined person. Not, I'm working on controlling my reactions. I'm someone who chooses my responses thoughtfully. The linguistic shift matters. The identity claim matters. And the evidence you're consistently generating, however small in any individual moment, is what makes the claim real. Making success structural. One of the most practical anti-sabotage strategies is reducing the degree to which your progress depends on your psychological state in any given moment. Self-sabotage thrives in environments where success requires heroic consistency of willpower, motivation, and positive self-belief. The moment any of those falter, and they will, the door opens. The solution is systems, automation, accountability structures, environmental design that makes following through easier than not following through. If you know that you self-sabotage at a certain juncture, build the structure that bypasses the juncture entirely. If you tend to cancel gym sessions when you're tired, work out with a partner whose time you'll waste by canceling. If you tend to avoid savings transfers at month end, automate them on payday. If you tend to pick fights when anxiety is high, have a pre-established protocol for those moments, a run, a journaling practice, a conversation with a specific person, that interrupts the pattern before it activates. Self-sabotage can be outmaneuvered, not by being stronger than it, by being smarter than it. The discipline architecture, how to do what needs to be done, even when you don't want to. Here is a question worth sitting with. Is there a gap between who you are and who you know you're capable of being? For most people who are honest with themselves, the answer is yes. Not a small gap, a significant one. The gap between the version of yourself that exists and the version that you know in your clearest moments is genuinely possible. That gap has a name. It's called the discipline deficit, and closing it is the work of this chapter. Discipline has a branding problem. Somewhere in our cultural narrative, it became associated with joyless rigidity. The person who wakes at 4 a.m., eats the same meal every day, never indulges, never rests, never deviates. This image makes most people recoil, and reasonably so. It doesn't look like a life. It looks like a prison sentence with better abs. Real discipline is nothing like this. Real discipline is the practice of doing what aligns with your deepest values and your most important goals, especially when it's inconvenient. It's not about eliminating pleasure. It's about refusing to sacrifice long-term meaning for short-term comfort. It's not about rigidity. It's about integrity. The alignment between what you say matters and how you actually spend your time, attention, and energy. And it starts with one thing that most discipline-building conversations skip entirely: your why. The why architecture discipline built on I should is fragile. Discipline built on I must because this is who I am and what I'm building is nearly unbreakable. The difference is the why. Why do you want to master your mouth? The generic answer, to communicate better, won't carry you through the moment when you're furious and every instinct screams to say the exact wrong thing. But because I've watched careless words destroy relationships I valued deeply, and I refuse to keep doing that, that's a why with weight. Why do you want to control your mind? Because I'm exhausted from being held hostage by my own thinking. Because I know what I'm capable of when my mind is on my side. Because I've seen what's possible and I'm tired of my own patterns keeping me from it. That why will get you out of bed. The stronger, more specific, more personal your why, the less willpower your discipline requires. Willpower fights against resistance. A compelling why dissolves resistance. Spend real time with this. For each of the 4 pillars, write the truest, most specific answer you can find to Why does this actually matter to me? Not the correct answer. The real one. The small win system. The architecture of lasting discipline is not dramatic. It is modest and consistent. Most people design their discipline plans for their best days, for the version of themselves that wakes up motivated, well-rested, and charged with clarity. Then their average Tuesday arrives and the plan collapses, because average Tuesdays don't feel like best days. Design your discipline for your worst days. Ask, what is the smallest version of this practice that I could execute even when I'm exhausted, distracted, or unmotivated? Not the ideal version, the minimum viable version. The minimum viable version of exercise might be 10 minutes of movement. The minimum viable version of financial discipline might be spending 60 seconds reviewing your transactions before bed. The minimum viable version of mindfulness might be 3 intentional breaths before getting out of bed. On good days, you'll exceed the minimum. On hard days, you'll meet it. And both count. The pattern of consistency, even at minimum, is what builds the identity of a disciplined person. Missing entirely does not. Environment as discipline infrastructure. We've touched on environmental design throughout this book. In the context of discipline specifically, the principle is this: make the desired behavior easier and the undesired behavior harder. This isn't cheating. This is wisdom. Relying on willpower to override an environment that constantly invites the wrong behavior is exhausting and ultimately unsuccessful. Designing an environment that naturally channels you toward the right behavior is sustainable. The workout clothes laid out the night before, the healthy meal prepped for Monday, the phone in the other room during focused work, the automatic investment transfer that happens before you see the paycheck, the books on the nightstand instead of the television in the bedroom. None of these require willpower in the moment. They require intentionality in the design. One moment of thoughtful environment design saves dozens of willpower expenditures. The consistency principle. Here's the discipline insight that changes everything when it actually lands. Consistency over intensity. Always. 10 minutes of exercise every day produces better long-term results than 2-hour sessions 3 times a week. Daily review of your financial picture is more powerful than quarterly deep dives. A few minutes of intentional self-talk each morning does more than an occasional motivational immersion weekend. Intensity feels better in the moment. It feels like progress, like commitment, like the real thing. But the brain learns through repetition. The neural pathways that make behaviors automatic, that convert disciplines from effortful choices into natural habits, are built through frequency, not magnitude. You are training your nervous system. Train it consistently. The recovery protocol. You will miss days. You will slip into old patterns. There will be weeks where the discipline infrastructure you've built seems to exist on a different planet from where you're actually living. This is not failure. This is the predictable experience of a human being building new patterns while carrying old ones. The single most important discipline skill, more important than any specific practice, is speed of return, not whether you deviate, how quickly you return after deviating. The person who misses one day of their practice and returns the next day is not meaningfully set back. The person who misses one day, decides they've failed, and stops for 3 weeks, has lost enormous ground. Every return, however small, is a vote for the identity you're building. This is who I am, someone who comes back. Discipline as identity. This is where everything converges. When you first begin building discipline, it requires conscious effort. You have to remind yourself to pause before speaking. You have to deliberately redirect your thoughts. You have to consciously choose your emotional responses. You have to intentionally review your finances. But practiced consistently, something shifts. The deliberate becomes natural. The effortful becomes automatic. The discipline you do becomes who you are. The athlete who is trained consistently for years doesn't experience their morning workout as discipline. It's just part of their day, as natural as eating breakfast. The person who has practiced thoughtful communication for long enough doesn't have to consciously run conversations through the triple gate. It happens automatically. You are building toward that, not through heroic willpower, through consistent, patient, well-designed practice. The gap between who you are and who you know you can be is not insurmountable. It is not even particularly mysterious. It closes, one small, consistent choice at a time. The power of strategic silence. In a world that rewards noise, silence is the ultimate power move. In 2019, a venture capital partner walked into a final pitch meeting with a startup he'd been tracking for 6 months. The team was talented. The product was compelling. The market opportunity was real. He was, by his own account, already 90% convinced before the meeting started. The founder presented brilliantly, and then, at the end, she made one mistake. She couldn't stop talking. Every pause in the conversation, she filled. Every moment of silence after a question, she rushed into with additional selling. She interpreted the partner's thoughtful quiet as uncertainty and met it with more words, more reassurance, more explanation, gradually undermining the confidence the presentation had established. The partner passed. He later said, "The silence told me she didn't trust the case she'd just made." This story lives in almost every domain of human life. The interview candidate who overshares when the interviewer goes quiet. The negotiator who drops their price before being asked. The person in a relationship who rushes to fill every emotional silence with premature reassurance. The leader who talks constantly because stillness feels like lost control. The discomfort with silence is one of the most expensive habits most people have never examined. Here's what silence actually communicates when deployed with intention. Confidence. The person who can sit comfortably in silence after making a strong point demonstrates that they trust it. No backfilling, no verbal insurance policy, just the point, standing on its own. Presence. Silence signals that you're genuinely listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak. In a world of perpetual distraction, the experience of being truly listened to is rare enough that it creates deep connection, intelligence, rushing to answer signals that you haven't really thought, pausing before answering, genuinely pausing, not performing consideration, signals that your response will be considered and worth hearing. Power. In any interaction where status or authority is at play, the person who controls the pace of conversation, including its silences, generally holds the stronger position. Strategic silence in negotiation. Nowhere is the power of silence more dramatically demonstrable than in negotiation. There is a principle, almost universally agreed upon by experienced negotiators across industries, that might be the single most consistently profitable thing you can learn. After you make a significant statement or receive an offer, stop talking. The discomfort of silence in a negotiation creates pressure, and that pressure will be relieved, typically by the person who speaks first. Often, that person will fill the silence by improving their position, offering additional benefits, or revealing information that weakens their leverage. The application is simple and almost impossibly difficult in practice. Offer your price, state your requirement, or make your position clear, and then wait, in silence. For as long as necessary. Test this the next time you negotiate anything, a salary, a contractor's quote, a purchase price, and observe what happens. The results are often immediate and significant. The private victory. There's a psychological phenomenon that few people know about, but most people have inadvertently experienced. Telling people your goals reduces your motivation to achieve them. The mechanism is counterintuitive. When you share a goal with others, your brain, social animal that it is, registers the approval and acknowledgement of that sharing as a form of partial achievement. The neurochemical reward meant to come at the finish line is partially released at the announcement. The goal feels fractionally accomplished before any actual work has been done. The result, reduced urgency, reduced motivation, reduced follow-through. This is why so many people's announced resolutions disappear by February. The announcement satisfied something the brain was looking for. The effort to follow through becomes slightly less compelling. The strategic alternative, work in silence and let your results speak. This doesn't mean secrecy or isolation. Share your goals with accountability partners who will support your process. Work with mentors and coaches who need to understand your objectives, but resist the impulse to announce your intentions to your broader social environment simply for the validation of having them acknowledged. The most impressive thing in any room is not the person who talks most about what they're going to do. It's the person who has already done it. Silence as protection. Not every situation that presents itself requires your participation. There's a remarkable amount of drama, conflict, and energy drain that exists in most people's lives specifically because they respond to every provocation, engage with every argument, and feel compelled to correct every misperception. The discipline of strategic non-engagement, choosing deliberately not to respond, is one of the most powerful forms of boundary setting available. When someone says something designed to provoke you, they are looking for a reaction. The reaction is what they need from the exchange. Denying it with calm, composed non-engagement is both psychologically strong and, frankly, far more effective at communicating your position than any counter-argument would be. This is not passivity. Strategic silence is a choice, an active one. It says, "This does not deserve my energy. I am selecting where my attention and response go, and this is not a selection I'm making." The person who can make that choice consistently, who doesn't feel compelled to defend themselves at every turn or correct every mischaracterization, radiates a kind of unhurried confidence that is genuinely magnetic. Silence and self-knowledge. Perhaps the most undervalued form of silence is internal. We live in an era of unprecedented noise. The average American adult is exposed to several thousand brand messages daily. Screens are everywhere. The podcast plays during the commute. The TV plays in the background during dinner. The phone is checked within minutes of waking and again within minutes of sleeping. In this environment, the interior life, the quiet space where genuine self-knowledge lives, where real decisions are made, where creative insight emerges, is chronically starved. The regular practice of deliberate quiet, even 10 or 15 minutes daily, is not a luxury. It is cognitive maintenance. It is the space where your brain processes accumulated experience, consolidates learning, surfaces intuitions that never get heard in the noise, and generates the kind of creative solutions that never arrive when you're frantically busy. Silence, in this sense, is not empty. It is extraordinarily full. It contains everything that noise drowns out. The practice starts small. Each day this week, identify one conversation where you would normally speak and instead choose to listen fully. Not planning your response while the other person talks, but genuinely present, attending to everything they're saying. Notice the quality of what you learn. Notice the quality of connection. Each day, sit in silence for 5 minutes before you reach for your phone in the morning. No agenda, no direction, just stillness. Let what arises, arise. And in any negotiation, important conversation, or moment where you feel the urge to fill the silence with more words, pause, wait, trust the strength of what you've already said. Silence is not absence. Wielded with intention, it is the most powerful thing in the room. Emotional intelligence, the real competitive advantage. Why IQ gets you hired and EQ determines everything. In the mid-1990s, psychologist Daniel Goleman published a book that upended decades of conventional wisdom about what actually drives human success. His central claim, supported by decades of research, was this: above a basic threshold, IQ is a poor predictor of who succeeds. Emotional intelligence is far more determining. The studies were striking. In studies of business leaders, the highest performers weren't necessarily the most analytically brilliant. They were the most emotionally intelligent. In assessments of career advancement, EQ outperformed IQ as a predictor by significant margins. In analyses of relationship satisfaction, physical health, and general life satisfaction, emotional intelligence showed up as one of the most consistent differentiators. 30 years later, this finding has been so thoroughly replicated that it is no longer controversial in psychology or organizational research, and yet the vast majority of people's personal development effort goes into skills, technical, analytical, professional. The interior work of emotional intelligence gets, at best, occasional attention. This chapter is about changing that. What emotional intelligence actually is. Emotional intelligence is not about being nice. It is not about suppressing strong emotions or performing agreeableness. It is not the same as emotional sensitivity. Emotional intelligence is a set of specific, learnable skills organized around 4 domains. Self-awareness, the ability to recognize your own emotional states accurately in real time, including their triggers, their physical manifestations, and their likely behavioral consequences. Self-regulation, the capacity to experience emotions without being immediately controlled by them, creating the gap between feeling and action where choice lives. Empathy, the skill of accurately understanding others' emotional states, perspectives, and motivations, including in the absence of explicit communication. Social skill, the practical ability to navigate relationships effectively, communicating, influencing, leading, managing conflict, and building connection with genuine competence. Let's work through the practical development of each. Building self-awareness. Most people have a surprisingly limited vocabulary for their own emotional experience. They know they feel bad, but are they frustrated, disappointed, anxious, hurt, resentful, embarrassed, lonely? Each of these is a distinct emotional experience with distinct behavioral implications. Treating them all as bad is like a physician responding to every symptom with, "You feel unwell." Begin expanding your emotional vocabulary deliberately. When you notice an emotional state, resist the broad label and reach for precision. What specifically am I feeling? Is there a word that names this more accurately? This precision serves several purposes. It activates the rational brain, creating immediate regulation effect. It makes patterns visible that would otherwise remain invisible. And it makes effective communication about your interior experience possible, which, as we'll see, transforms relationships. Pay attention to where emotions live in your body. For most people, different emotions have distinct physical signatures, locations and sensations that show up before the conscious mind has labeled what's happening. Anxiety might be a tightening in the chest. Anger might be heat in the jaw or shoulders. Sadness might be a heaviness in the sternum. Fear might be a dropping sensation in the abdomen. Learning to read these physical signatures gives you early warning, the ability to catch emotional states before they reach the peak of intensity when they're hardest to regulate. developing self-regulation. Self-regulation is not suppression. Suppression, forcing emotions down, refusing to acknowledge them, is associated with significant physical and psychological costs. Suppressed emotions don't disappear, they accumulate, and they tend to find expression in disproportionate ways at unexpected moments. Self-regulation is processing, moving through emotional experience consciously, using the information it contains, and returning to equilibrium. The three-step real-time regulation protocol. Name it. I'm feeling angry right now. This single act, and decades of neuroscience support this, reduces the intensity of the limbic response and activates the prefrontal cortex. You are not pretending the anger isn't there. You're bringing the observing mind into relationship with it. Allow it. For 30 seconds to 2 minutes, simply allow the emotion to be present without acting on it. Breathe. Don't reach for your phone. Don't say something. Don't make a decision. Just allow. Emotions, when allowed rather than fought, tend to peak and begin to subside on their own timeline. Respond from choice. Once intensity has decreased slightly, even modestly, you have access to choice again, not the perfect response, a chosen response rather than an automatic one. This protocol takes practice. The moments when you most need it are the moments when practicing it is hardest. This is why rehearsing it during lower-stakes situations matters. You're building the neural pathway so it's available when the stakes are high. Cultivating genuine empathy. Empathy, in the research literature, is not a personality trait. It's a skill with specific components that can be developed. The foundational practice is perspective-taking, the deliberate act of placing yourself in someone else's frame of reference and asking, genuinely, what is this like for them? Not what would it be like for me, but what is it like for them, given their history, their fears, their values, their particular circumstances. This distinction matters more than it might seem. When we imagine our own experience in someone else's situation, we apply our own emotional blueprint to their circumstances. When we genuinely attempt to understand their interior experience, we learn something about them. Practice this with people you find difficult. What might be driving their behavior from the inside? What fears, insecurities, or pressures might be creating the patterns you find challenging? This isn't about excusing harmful behavior. It's about understanding it well enough to respond effectively, rather than simply reacting. The social skills layer. Everything we've discussed in this book feeds into your capacity for effective social interaction. Your word choices, your emotional regulation, your listening, your self-awareness. When these systems are functioning well, something that might be called social magnetism becomes a natural byproduct. 2 specific skills worth developing deliberately. Conflict navigation. Most people either avoid conflict entirely or engage in ways that amplify rather than resolve it. The effective middle is direct, boundaried, solution-focused engagement. When conflict arises, lead with curiosity about the other person's experience. Describe your experience in behavioral terms, not character terms. Focus on the future. What needs to be different, rather than the past, which cannot be changed. Stay regulated enough to listen to their response. The art of genuine interest. The single most reliable way to be experienced as compelling company is genuinely curious attention. Ask questions that invite real answers, not surface pleasantries. Listen to the answers with actual attention. Follow the thread of what they share into the next question. People rarely have the experience of being genuinely attended to. When you provide it, you become memorable and significant. Emotional intelligence is not a soft skill. It is the skill beneath all other skills. It is what allows your technical abilities, your knowledge, and your discipline to actually reach their potential in the world. Develop it deliberately, measure it honestly. It will return the investment in every domain of your life. Designing your success environment, stop fighting your surroundings. Start engineering them. In 2012, researchers at Cornell University published a study on snacking behavior in office environments. They placed candy in clear bowls on desks and opaque bowls on desks. The candy in clear bowls was eaten, on average, 71% more frequently, by the same people in the same offices across repeated trials. Nobody in the study decided to eat more candy. Their environment made that decision for them. This is the most consistently underestimated fact in human behavior. Your environment is shaping your actions constantly, far more powerfully than your conscious choices. The temperature of your room influences your cognitive performance. The presence of natural light affects your mood and alertness. The disorder on your desk increases cognitive load and reduces creative output. The people you're physically near influence your beliefs, your habits, and your aspirations, not through dramatic conversations, but through constant, subtle contagion. Understanding this doesn't make you a passive victim of your surroundings. It makes you an engineer. Once you see how profoundly environment shapes behavior, you can stop trying to fight your surroundings through willpower and start designing them to support the outcomes you want. This is the final architectural piece of self-mastery, and it might be the highest leverage one. The physical space. Your living and working environments send constant signals to your nervous system about who you are and what to expect from a given space. Walk into a cluttered, disordered space, and your brain registers cognitive load, reduced focus, and diffuse attention. Walk into a clean, organized, intentionally designed space, and your brain registers readiness, capacity, and clarity. The effect is measurable in performance, mood, and self-regulation capacity. This is why the advice to clean your space when you're struggling isn't just productivity folk wisdom. It's an environmental intervention that genuinely changes your neurological state. Audit your primary spaces, where you work, where you sleep, where you spend significant daily time, and ask honestly, does this environment reflect and support the person I'm building or the patterns I'm trying to leave behind? Then make one change. The workspace becomes sacred ground for focused work, not casual distraction. The bedroom becomes genuinely restful, not a second office. The kitchen supports the eating behavior you want, not the eating behavior you're trying to reduce. Small physical changes create significant behavioral shifts. Start where the change is easiest and build from there. The social environment. There is a concept in social psychology, social proof, that describes the human tendency to look to others to determine appropriate behavior in ambiguous situations. We are profoundly social animals, and the people around us calibrate our sense of what's normal, possible, acceptable, and expected. This calibration happens whether we consciously engage with it or not. Spend significant time with people who complain consistently about their circumstances, avoid responsibility, and treat ambition with cynicism, and your own orientation gradually shifts in that direction. Spend time with people who take ownership, pursue meaningful goals, and treat growth as normal. And the same calibration happens in the other direction. This is not an argument for social elitism or cutting off everyone who isn't performing optimally. It is an argument for intentionality about your primary social influences. Who are the 5 or 6 people you spend the most time with? What does regular exposure to them calibrate as normal? Does that calibration serve your development or hinder it? If there are people in your current social landscape who consistently pull you toward your worst patterns, who enable avoidance, encourage victimhood, or make ambition feel pretentious, You have options that don't require dramatic severance. You can simply spend less time in those interactions and more time in ones that calibrate you differently. Simultaneously, seek out people who are where you want to be, not for networking in the transactional sense, but for genuine exposure to what thriving in the domains you care about actually looks like. The person who has already built the thing you're trying to build doesn't just provide information. They recalibrate your sense of what's possible. The information environment. Every piece of content you consume is an input into your mental and emotional environment. And most people's information diet is nutritionally catastrophic. This is not moralizing about specific platforms or content types. It is a straightforward observation. Content designed to maximize engagement is designed to provoke the most intense emotional responses: outrage, anxiety, comparison, fear, craving. These responses keep you watching. They also chronically activate your threat detection systems, contribute to baseline anxiety, and shape your implicit worldview in ways you've almost certainly never consciously agreed to. Design your information environment the way you'd design your physical environment, intentionally, in service of the person you're building. This might mean a morning information protocol that starts the day with content that educates or inspires rather than agitates. It might mean specific times for news consumption rather than a constant background stream. It might mean an honest audit of which social media accounts leave you feeling worse about yourself or the world, and a deliberate reduction of their presence. The question to apply to every regular information source: does consistent exposure to this make me more capable, more clear, more inspired, or more empowered? If the honest answer is no, that's not neutral consumption. It's a cost. The routine environment. Routines are, in a sense, environments you carry with you through time. They create predictable conditions that either support or undermine your goals. A morning routine that includes intentional direction, physical activation, and deliberate mental preparation creates a fundamentally different neurological starting point for the day than one that begins with passive scrolling and reactive urgency. An evening routine that includes preparation for the next day, review of progress, and deliberate transition toward rest sets up the next morning to be the former rather than the latter. You don't need an elaborate multi-hour protocol. You need a consistent sequence that creates the conditions your best self needs to show up. Design it modestly enough that it's executable on hard days. Execute it consistently enough that it becomes automatic. The accountability environment. The final environmental design element is perhaps the most powerful. Create social structures that expect your follow-through. Human beings are exquisitely sensitive to social expectation. The prospect of explaining to someone whose opinion matters why you didn't do the thing you said you would do is, for most people, a more reliable motivator than the prospect of personal benefit from doing it. Accountability partners, coaches, peer groups, public commitments with meaningful stakes. These aren't crutches for people who lack self-discipline. They are environmentally designed support systems that work with human psychology rather than against it. Identify one person who genuinely wants to see you succeed and who you'd feel some accountability to disappoint. Share one specific commitment, one that matters, with a real timeline. Ask them to check in. This single environmental addition can do more for your follow-through than any motivational insight. The compound effect of environmental design. Environmental changes don't produce dramatic overnight transformation. What they produce is a gradual, consistent shift in your default behavior, the things you do automatically, without requiring willpower or deliberate decision. And default behavior, compounded over months and years, is what your life is made of. You are not fighting your environment's influence. You are directing it. Design accordingly. The compound effect. Small choices, enormous lives. Why 1% better? Every day changes everything. There's a thought experiment worth spending a few minutes with. Imagine two people, same age, same starting circumstances, same general level of intelligence and resources. Call them Alex and Jordan. On day one, Alex decides to get 1% better, not dramatically better. 1%, in one small area of their behavior, and the next day, 1% better again, and the day after that. Jordan does the inverse. No catastrophic decline, just 1% worse each day, slightly less intentional about their words, slightly more reactive in their emotional responses, slightly more likely to make the financially convenient choice rather than the financially wise one. Do the math across 1 year. Alex, improving 1% daily for 365 days, 37 times better than where they started. Jordan, declining 1% daily, down to nearly zero of their original capacity. Same period, opposite trajectories, not from dramatic choices, from the accumulated weight of 1,000 small ones. This is the compound effect, and it is the most reliable force in human development. Why small changes? Work. The human brain resists large changes dramatically. When the change feels large, the threat detection system activates. This is unfamiliar. This requires significant energy. This might not work, and then what? Resistance, procrastination, and eventual abandonment are the predictable outcomes of attempts at dramatic transformation. Small changes fly under the radar of the resistance system. A decision to read 1 page per day doesn't feel significant enough to fight. A commitment to do 10 minutes of exercise doesn't trigger the existential anxiety that completely transforming my health does. A practice of making one conscious financial decision daily doesn't feel like the overwhelming project that fixing my money problems sounds like. The trick is that these small changes, unlike the dramatic ones, actually happen. And because they happen consistently, they compound. The mouth. Small choices, transformed relationships. Every time you pause before responding in a charged moment, you're making a 1% better choice that strengthens a neural pathway. Every time you choose an encouraging word when a critical one was available, you're building a slightly different relational environment around you. Every time you ask a genuine question instead of making a closing statement, you're practicing the conversational intelligence that makes you someone others want to think and work with. None of these moments feel significant. Cumulatively, across months, they produce a completely different experience of you. In boardrooms, in bedrooms, in friendships. The mind, small choices, transformed thinking. Every time you notice a catastrophic thought and choose a more accurate interpretation, you're weakening the neural pathway of catastrophizing and strengthening the one of balanced assessment. Every time you direct your morning attention toward your goals before your phone, you're training your reticular activating system to look for the things that matter rather than the things that alarm. Every time you feed your mind with content that expands rather than contracts your sense of what's possible, you're adding to a mental landscape that eventually feels like a very different country from the one you currently inhabit. The mood, small choices. Transformed resilience. Every time you use the 3-step regulation protocol in a low-stakes situation, you're building the pathway that will be available when the high-stakes situation arrives. Every time you deliberately shift your physical state, a few deep breaths, a change of posture, brief movement, you're practicing the embodied mood management that eventually becomes instinctive. Every time you reframe a frustration as information rather than an attack, you're building the cognitive flexibility that makes you progressively harder to destabilize. The money, small choices, transformed wealth. The compound effect is perhaps most numerically obvious with money and most emotionally neglected. The extra $25 redirected from an impulse purchase to an investment account this month matters almost nothing today and potentially everything in 30 years. The habit of tracking expenses, literally spending 5 minutes weekly understanding where your money went, compounded over years, produces a financial intelligence and decision quality that no one-time financial education event can replicate. The practice of asking, "Is this aligned with my financial goals?" before every discretionary purchase, compounded across thousands of purchasing decisions, produces a profoundly different financial trajectory than the alternative. The invisible progress problem. The greatest challenge with the compound effect is that its early stages look like nothing. You've been practicing the pause before speaking for 3 weeks. Your relationships don't look dramatically different yet. You've been doing morning intention setting for a month. Your career trajectory hasn't obviously shifted. You've been tracking expenses for 6 weeks. Your net worth hasn't transformed. This is the period where most people quit. This isn't working, and they return to previous patterns, which feel at least familiar. But this is precisely the period where the compound effect is doing its most important work, below the surface, building the infrastructure. The relationships, the mindset, the emotional resilience, the financial position are all becoming, just not yet, obviously. The compound effect, across virtually every domain, follows an exponential rather than linear curve. Slow, almost invisible progress in the early stages. Dramatic, visible acceleration later. The people who experience the acceleration are almost always the people who stayed through the early invisible period. Track to trust. The practical solution to the invisible progress problem is measurement. Track your small actions consistently. Not outcomes, you have limited direct control over outcomes. Actions. Did you practice the pause today? Did you do your morning direction practice? Did you check your financial picture? Did you use your mood regulation tool during a moment of stress? A simple checkbox system, 7 boxes for 7 days, 1 for each practice, makes progress. Visible even when external outcomes aren't yet reflecting the internal work. And visible progress reinforces the behavior that creates it. The compound effect doesn't require perfection. It requires consistency. And consistency, tracked and celebrated at the level of small actions rather than just large outcomes, is something any person willing to try can sustain. Integration. The 4 keys working as one. When the system clicks, everything in this book has been building toward this. Not 4 separate improvements you're managing in parallel. One integrated system of self-mastery, where each element strengthens every other, where a gain in any single domain creates positive leverage across all 4, and where the whole becomes genuinely greater than the sum of its parts. Let's make the integration concrete. The cross-pillar architecture. When Sarah, a project manager in Atlanta, first began working on her self-mastery, she started where most people start, one thing at a time. She worked on her communication, then her spending habits, then her emotional regulation. Progress happened, but it was slow and somewhat fragile. Gains in one area didn't seem to travel anywhere else. Then she noticed something. The weeks she was managing her mood well, using her regulation tools, maintaining her morning practice, were the same weeks her financial discipline was strongest. She wasn't making impulsive purchases. She was making clearer decisions at work. Her relationships felt less friction, and when her mood regulation slipped during a particularly stressful project, everything else deteriorated together. Her words became sharper, her focus fragmented, her spending became emotional. The 4 keys don't just parallel each other, they interlock. Your mouth control develops the same mental muscle you use for mind control. The deliberate pause between impulse and action is structurally identical, whether you're catching a word before it exits or a thought before it spirals. Your mind control directly determines your mood. The cognitive reframing tools you use to redirect catastrophic thinking are the same ones that prevent a difficult event from becoming a destructive emotional state. Your mood management protects your money. Financial decisions made in emotional distress are categorically different from those made in calm clarity. The person who is emotionally regulated almost never makes the impulse purchase motivated by anxiety or the avoidance that comes from financial overwhelm. And your financial security supports your emotional stability and your communication. Money stress is one of the most consistent predictors of relationship conflict and poor communication. The person who has reduced financial anxiety communicates from a calmer, more secure internal position. The daily integration practice. Integration doesn't require a complicated daily system. It requires a brief, consistent one. A simple morning integration practice. 2 minutes reviewing your most meaningful goals across all 4 domains. Not task lists, but the actual life you're building. What am I communicating toward? What am I building mentally? What emotional state am I cultivating? What financial future am I constructing? 2 minutes identifying one specific intention for each pillar today. Not a sweeping goal. A small, specific, executable intention. Today I'll practice the triple gate in my team meeting. Today I'll redirect when I notice catastrophizing. Today I'll check in with my emotional state before responding to the difficult email. Today I'll review last week's transactions before making any purchases. 1 minute of brief visualization, seeing yourself moving through the day with the qualities you're building. Clear in your communication, directed in your thinking, steady in your emotions, intentional with your money. 5 minutes, 4 pillars, every day. The accumulation of these 5-minute practices across months produces something that no single area intervention ever creates. A comprehensively different experience of yourself. Cross-pillar crisis response. Perhaps the most valuable application of integration is crisis response. How you navigate genuinely difficult periods. When difficulty arrives, most people's self-mastery deteriorates in sequence. Stress overwhelms mood regulation first. Poor emotional regulation leads to communication failures. Communication failures create relationship stress that further destabilizes mood. The financial dimension of the crisis, handled emotionally rather than strategically, compounds the damage. The integrated response looks different. When you notice stress building, you immediately engage your mood tools, not waiting until the emotional state is unmanageable. Stabilized emotional state means you can access your mind control tools, reframing the situation accurately, directing your attention toward what you can influence. Clear thinking means your communication remains intentional rather than reactive. You speak from your adult self rather than your threatened self. And the combination of emotional stability and clear thinking means your financial decisions during the difficult period are strategic rather than panic-driven. The crisis still exists. Your experience of it, and more importantly, your navigation of it, is fundamentally different. The integration indicator. Here's a useful self-assessment. Across your past month, consider these 4 questions honestly. Is there a pattern where a struggle in one area consistently preceded or accompanied struggles in the others? Were there periods where all 4 areas were functioning well simultaneously? What would it look like, specifically, if all 4 were integrated and functioning well for you? What single improvement, right now, would create the most positive leverage across all 4? This last question is powerful because integration means you rarely have to work on all four simultaneously with equal intensity. Often there's one area that, if addressed, would create positive movement across all the others. Maybe for you right now, emotional regulation is the keystone, because when your mood is managed, your words, your thinking, and your financial decisions all stabilize naturally. Maybe financial stress is the root currently, and addressing it would reduce the anxiety that's fragmenting your focus and creating friction in your relationships. Find your keystone and work there with full commitment. Trust the integration to carry positive changes into the other three. The person you're becoming. There's a version of you that exists on the other side of this work. Not a perfect version, not an untouched by difficulty version, not a version that never makes mistakes or has difficult days, a version that knows how to come back, quickly, honestly, without prolonged self-punishment. A version that has relationships built on genuine respect and honest communication. A version whose mind, when undirected, defaults to clarity and possibility rather than anxiety and self-doubt. A version with emotional stability that people around them can feel, that creates safety, because this person won't suddenly become someone else under pressure. A version whose financial life is not a source of constant background stress, but a platform for genuine freedom and generosity. This person is not some idealized fantasy. They are the person you're currently building, one consistent choice at a time. Your 90-day transformation roadmap, the plan that makes this real. You've come this far. You've read the psychology, absorbed the frameworks, and recognized yourself in more of the patterns than was entirely comfortable. Now comes the part that determines everything. What are you going to do with it? Knowledge without action is, at best, interesting. At worst, it's a sophisticated way of feeling like you're changing without actually changing. Many people spend years consuming personal development content without meaningfully shifting their lives because consumption is easy and comfortable, and transformation is neither. This 90-day roadmap is designed to close that gap. Not through intensity, but through accumulation. Not through perfection, but through consistency. 90 days, 12 weeks, one primary focus per week, with awareness maintained across all four pillars. Weeks 1 to 2. The observation phase. Before you change anything, see things clearly. Each day, keep a simple log, 10 minutes maximum, of one notable moment from each pillar. A moment where your mouth control was tested. A thought pattern you observed without being fully controlled by. An emotional reaction you noticed. A financial decision, large or small, no judgment, no prescribed changes yet, simply seeing clearly what your current patterns actually are. By the end of 2 weeks, you will have documented enough of your own patterns to identify your primary points of leverage, the specific behaviors in each pillar that, if shifted, would create the most significant improvement. Weeks 3 to 4. Foundation habits. Introduce 4 small daily practices, 1 per pillar, mouth. The 3-second pause before any emotionally significant communication. Mind, 5 minutes of morning direction, 3 goals, 3 gratitudes, 1 daily intention. Mood, the name-breathe frame sequence deployed deliberately at least once per day. Money, a 60-second daily expense check, any money that came in or went out today. These 4 practices take less than 15 minutes total. Execute all 4 every day for 2 weeks. Consistency over perfection, weeks 5 to 6. Pattern. Interruption. Identify your highest impact negative pattern in each pillar, the behavior that, when it activates, causes the most downstream damage. Mouth. The specific communication behavior that most consistently damages your relationships or opportunities. Interrupting. Defensiveness. Sarcastic deflection. Oversharing. Mind, the dominant negative thought pattern, catastrophizing, mind reading, all or nothing thinking, whatever shows up most reliably. Mood, the emotional pattern that most disrupts your life. Anxiety spirals, reactive anger, withdrawal under stress. Money, the financial behavior that most undermines your long-term position. Impulse purchasing under stress. Avoidance of financial information. Lifestyle inflation. For 2 weeks, your specific focus is interrupting these patterns, not eliminating them completely, but catching them earlier and inserting a chosen response before the automatic one takes over. Weeks 7 to 8. Environmental optimization. Review each of your primary environments through the lens of the 4 pillars. Make one concrete change to your physical space that supports each pillar. One change to your social environment. A boundary set, a new relationship invested in, a draining interaction reduced. 1. Change to your information environment. Something removed, something added. 1 change to your routine. A better morning or evening sequence that systematically supports your development. 8 changes, 1 per pillar per environmental category. Prioritize the ones with the clearest impact. Weeks 9 to 10. Resilience. Building. Identify your primary trigger in each pillar, the specific situation, person, or internal state that most reliably activates your worst patterns. For each trigger, design a specific response protocol, not a vague intention, a literal script. When specific trigger happens, I will specific action. Written down, rehearsed mentally, available before the trigger activates. This preparation does something important. It removes the moment of crisis cognitive load of deciding what to do. The decision has been made in advance. The pattern can execute automatically. Weeks 11 to 12. Integration. By this point, you have awareness, foundational habits, pattern, interruption skills, environmental support, and trigger response protocols across all 4 pillars. The final 2 weeks are about weaving these elements into a coherent daily practice and developing the cross-pillar awareness that makes the 4 keys function as an integrated system. Each morning, the 5-minute integration practice. Each evening, a brief reflection. Where did I use my tools today? Where did I fall back into old patterns? What do I want to do differently tomorrow? At the end of week 12, conduct a full self-assessment. Rate yourself in each pillar on a scale of 1 to 10. Compare to your week 1 baseline. Identify the area of greatest growth. Identify the area still requiring the most attention. Design the next 90 days from that honest assessment. The real transformation. By the end of this period, something will have shifted, not just in what you do, but in who you experience yourself to be. You'll notice yourself pausing in situations where you once reacted. You'll catch your mind running an old negative pattern and redirect it without drama. You'll move through difficult emotional experiences with more speed and less wreckage. You'll look at your financial picture without the avoidance anxiety that once made looking impossible. These aren't dramatic transformations. They're the quiet, cumulative evidence of a person who showed up consistently for their own development across 90 days. And 90 days is not the destination. It is, as it has always been, the beginning. The life you want is not waiting for circumstances to align, for motivation to arrive, or for the perfect moment to begin. It is being constructed right now, one choice at a time, in the ordinary moments of your ordinary days. Control your mouth, direct your mind, manage your mood, master your money. The 4 keys are in your hands. What you choose to open with them is entirely up to you.